mortars, comma, as well as the civilians who are enabling them to fire and hide. The IDF, the Israel Defense Forces spokesperson's office says anything affiliated with Hamas is a legitimate target. And then they proceeded to act on their grand strategy. And you have to acknowledge it was very successful. It was a pretty impressive show. During the Lebanon War, about 55 civilians were killed during the first couple of days. But then when we come to Gaza, the Israeli press was exulting. They were very excited by Israel's display of what they called shock and awe. And in their shock and awe, in the first couple of days of the Gaza massacre, they killed 300 Palestinians. Not 55, 300. This is business. This is serious. Several days into the slaughter, an informed Israeli strategic analyst writing for Israel's most respected newspaper, Haaretz, he said, quote, "The IDF, which planned to attack buildings and sites populated by hundreds of people, did not warn them in advance to leave, but intended to kill a great many of them, and succeeded." Well, people like Benny Morris, that sometime historian, full-time propagandist, he could barely contain his pride at what he called, quote, Israel's highly efficient air assault on Hamas. Not everyone in Israel was as thrilled. There's the columnist, B. Michael, and he said, "I don't think it's very impressive to dispatch helicopter gunships and jet planes over a giant prison and fire at its people." Who are these people in this prison? Well, Gideon Levy, the fellow I mentioned to you earlier, he described that first or second day Israel killed, quote, 70 traffic cops at their graduation ceremony, young men in desperate search of a livelihood, who thought they had found it in the police and instead found death from the skies. Incidentally, there was no accident. It was not the fog of war. The decision to attack the Palestinian kids at their graduation ceremony, that had been contemplated, thought through months earlier. And the Israeli military legal experts chimed in, they discussed and debated. It was pre-planned 6 months earlier. Young men in desperate search of a livelihood who thought they'd found it in the police and instead found death from the skies. As Israel targeted schools, mosques, hospitals, ambulances, UN sanctuaries, as it flattened entire neighborhoods, as it slaughtered and incinerated Gaza's defenseless civilian population, Israeli commenters gloated. Quote, "Gaza is to Lebanon as the second sitting for an exam is to the first. A second chance to get it right. And this time around, Israel has hurled Gaza back, not a mere 20 years, as it promised to do in Lebanon, but we've hurled it back 60 years. We've hurled it back to the 1940s. Electricity is available only for a few hours a day." Another Israeli commentator said, "Israel regained its deterrence capabilities." Incidentally, notice, nobody pretends it had anything to do with the rocket attacks. It had everything to do with Lebanon, restoring the deterrence capacity. Israel regained its deterrence capabilities because the war in Gaza has compensated for the shortcomings of the Second Lebanon War, the 2006 war. And a third said, "There is no doubt that Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is upset these days. There will no longer be anyone in the Arab world who can claim that Israel is weak." And it's true. Who can now claim that Israel is weak? Who can doubt that it is strong? It's courageous. It's heroic. It's brave. It caged in behind barbed wire fences and concrete walls a teeming refugee population. About 80% of Gaza consists of refugees and their children and grandchildren. Half of the population is under 16 years of age. It deprived this captive population for months on end, really years on end, of food, medicine, and other basic necessities, reducing it to abject despair. It then sent in its jet planes, its helicopter gunships, its tanks, and its armored personnel carriers. It sprayed entire civilian neighborhoods with white phosphorus. It then proceeded to slaughter and incinerate this defenseless population. Who can claim now that Israel is weak? One person who was very excited, very thrilled, an American, by what happened, I think he went to your school. This fellow goes by the name of Thomas Friedman. And he was very pleased by what happened in Gaza. He says, Friedman always claims to have unique insight, this special take on things, the flat earth take on things. And he said, people have everything wrong. Israel did not lose the 2006 Lebanon war. He said Israel, in fact, won it. How did it win it? He said because Israel in 2006, it, quote, inflicted substantial property damage and collateral casualties on Lebanon at large. It targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure and did substantial damage. And thereby, he said, it administered an education, his words, an education to Hezbollah. Namely, it conveyed to Hezbollah that if you mess with us, we're going to wreck your country, destroy your country, and you will lose the support of your civilian population. So he says, Hezbollah has now been educated, and it will, quote, think 3 times next time before defying Israel. And that's probably true. We shouldn't deny that state terrorism does work. That's true. You target civilians and civilian infrastructure for a political goal. That's the definition of terrorism. The targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure for a political aim. That's the definition of terrorism. And it's going to deter your adversary. We shouldn't deny it, but we should call it by its name. Mr. Friedman calls it education. I hope it's not a reflection of what he experienced here, but most people call it state terrorism or terrorism. And then and that's no doubt why the Hezbollah limited itself to simply, or it seems pretty much simply verbal support for Hamas during the massacre because of the consequences that would ensue, the devastation of Lebanon. And then Mr. Friedman went on to express the hope that Israel was, again using his pedagogical language, it was trying to educate Hamas, and I'm quoting him, by inflicting a heavy death toll on Hamas militants and heavy pain on the Gaza population. Again, not hiding, nothing to conceal here. We want to terrorize that civilian population of Gaza, educate them so that they will learn not to mess with Israel. Now, Mr. Friedman, of course, has to conjure up some sort of justification for this terrorism, policy of state terrorism, and his policy is, his justification is the one that most of you have no doubt heard, that these satanic, demonic, Islamic fundamentalists, that they're so cowardly that they embed themselves among civilians. In Mr. Friedman's words, they nested themselves among civilians. They